Okay, so with all those things cleaned, we're now ready to repot the orchid. We've got rid of that manky media. We're going to put some nice fresh media in here. We've had a chance to give the orchid a good cleaning as well. If we've removed any of those sheaths where nasty insects like to hide behind, it gives us an opportunity as well to have a really good look at the root system of the orchid and see how healthy it is, because obviously from the roots up, basically the roots will tell you how well your plant is doing, how vigorously it's growing, and whether you need to make any adjustments to your culture. I really can't stress enough how key the root system is. So if you've got a healthy root system, you've got a healthy plant. It's as simple as that. Now, got quite a lot of new growths on this, and as I previously discussed, I was looking to, what I want to do is get some nice specimen sized plants. So I don't really want them draping all over the edge that you often find, especially with Bulbophyllum. You leave them alone, and before you know it, they start marching off the edge of the saucer and hanging off into the ether, which is okay, but it's not ideal. What I really want to do is nice compact plants like this. We've got a nice density of plants, all in a nice dense plant in one saucer. It's easier to move around, takes up less room, and when it does flower, because when they reach maturity, they'll flower from different locations. You'll get the blooms presented around the saucer rather than sort of like one hanging off over here, one hanging off over there. They're more likely to be central, which is going to make it a lot more aesthetically pleasing and a lot more manageable. You're less likely to knock something off when you're cleaning the greenhouse or moving around. So what I was going to do is I was going to cut this orchid, because I thought, you know what, if it's going to make the difference between having the orchid sort of moping around in the saucer or growing towards the edge of the saucer, if I wasn't able to fit it into this space in such a nice, neat manner, because all you're trying to do with Bulbophyllum is really to sort of buy time, because obviously they will grow along an extending rhizome. So the further away from the edge, the longer it's going to be until you next need to take action, either pruning a piece off and popping it back in, or repotting it and looking at how you can sort of realign the orchids to maximise that period of time. So what I'm doing now is I'm moving it around to see how central I can get it, so that those new growths have got the furthest distance possible to grow before they reach the edge of the pot. So it's all about placing it in the most appropriate manner. So do think about this bit. Like I say, we want to keep them in these saucers for long periods of time. So if we can orientate them in such a manner that that's going to happen, then that's going to be a lot better for us in the long run. So I've found a position in which I'm happy now. Lots of these growths, you might not be able to see them, but I've got all of the new growths orientated a good sort of like 2 to 3 inches, maybe even more away from the edge of the saucer, which is going to be great in the long term. It's going to buy that extra time. So I'll get some media knocked up, and we'll get this guy potted up, and then we'll have a look at the next one. Okay, so I've knocked up what I like to call my standard Bulbophyllum mix. So this is medium grade and a little bit of large grade pine bark or orchid bark. I think it looks like chewed up bits of Monterey pine, or maybe maritime pine, to be entirely honest. I've got some grovestone, which are the little bits of expanded or exploded glass, because that's going to keep the mix sweeter for a lot longer, because it allows it creates little air pockets within the mix itself. And then there's some high grade or A+ star, whatever they call it, Peruvian sphagnum moss. It's almost identical to the New Zealand sphagnum moss, and it's cheaper. Even the orchid bark, for those of you that have been following my channel for a while, this isn't like Orchiata or anything like this. This is actually the same stuff they sell for reptiles to go in the bottom of vivarium tanks. I've grown all my orchids in it, and they absolutely love it. I have no problems with them at all. So that's what I use. So that's my standard mix. That's what we're going to be putting it in. And I like to work with my media dry-ish, well, not dry, but on the damp side. So I tend to just actually get it all mixed up together like this, and then just with some rainwater, just stop it from being dusty really. And also, if you have got exposed orchid roots, you don't want to be taking the old media off and putting them into a dry mix, because it will just suck the moisture straight out of them. So it doesn't have to be sopping, because it actually just makes it a pain in the backside to work with. But if you're just going to get a bit of moisture into the mix like this, it's going to make a big difference. So a little bit more moisture in there. Like this. You can pre-soak your sphagnum moss. It may be advisable to do that. I find it, once it gets wet, and it like properly wet in a mix like this, doesn't matter seemingly how you mix it up, it always ends up sort of separating from the mix like really badly. So you'll take the first few handfuls out and you'll put it on in your saucer or in your pot, and you'll end up with like basically either all of the sphagnum moss in the first 2 handfuls, or like none of the sphagnum moss. So I like to just get it just damp like this. What we're looking for is a sort of a darkening of the wood chip, of the orchid bark. So you just don't want it sopping wet, because it just makes it, I think it just makes it harder to work with. If you use or pot your media in a different way, then that's entirely up to you. This is just the way that I find it easiest to use, so that's why I'm going to do it like that. Right, so he's here. I've got this guy roughly in the location, or he's presented in the saucer in the way in which I want him to be. I think it's going to give him the most amount of space. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take him out, try and keep him in the shape he's in, like that. And I'm just going to use just a sprinkling of this in the bottom of the saucer, like that, just so the roots just aren't pushed straight up against the plastic of the saucer, because obviously those which are adapted to photosynthesizing will be perfectly happy. Those roots which aren't adapted to photosynthesizing, i.e. they're not aerial roots, will not appreciate suddenly being exposed to, like, I don't know, like 4,000 foot candles of light, going from sort of like living in the darkness for their whole life. So what I'm going to do now is just hold him in position, and I'm just going to fill any of the voids in around the plant with mix. Nice and easy, nice and standard. I don't muck about either, just chuck it on there, get it on there, and what we're going to do is we're going to get a nice big handfuls of it all over the plant like this. There's not too much of it held up on top of the rhizomes, and you don't want any of it obstructing any of the new growth like this. Then I just jiggle the pot around like this. That's going to help everything settle down and hold the orchid in place. If you do see any roots which are exposed, by all means make sure you put some media there. If putting media there isn't appropriate, you might want to drape some sphagnum moss over them just to keep them moist. It won't take long for the plant to recognise that it's had a significant environmental change anyway, and will divert the growth of its roots downwards into the nice, fresh, moist media. So don't get too hung up about that sort of thing too much at this stage. What we are going to have to do is just be careful that new growth is presented in such a manner that it's able to continue its scramble basically across the surface of our media. We don't want to bury any of it. If you bury it, it will just die off, or when it does grow to near maturity, it'll end up looking distorted because it's pushed up against some bark, or something's been in the way which will have malformed it. So you just need to bear that in mind. This one's nearly done now. Also try not to bury the rhizome as well. Try and keep it near the surface of your media, or the final height of your media. That way it's less likely to be affected by rot, because if you do bury the rhizomes on some orchids, they're quite likely to rot off, and you can end up with the whole plant either being damaged for a long period of time, or in the worst case scenario, you'll get a fungal infection and the whole plant will then cark it, die, which is obviously not what you want at all. So this guy's nearly finished now. Just going to fill up any of those little spots. Just firm it down, not hard, but just firm it down with my fingers like this. And like I said, I get a lot of compliments about the moths, the moss that grows on top of the media. I use rainwater for everything. It's nice and soft, it's readily available, it's free. It takes very little faffing around to use it. And as a result, obviously I get a lot of spores, a lot of moss spores and lichens and stuff. So that will soon proliferate back on top of my media. And this will end up with a nice green covering of moss. If I was being particularly, or if I was feeling particularly particular about my covering, what I would have done is I would have saved just a few scraps of it. You don't need very much, just a few scraps of it. Laid them back on top of the media, like a little bit of a, I don't know, like a little bit of like laying a lawn, really, a little lawn, a moss lawn. And before you know it, it'll take off again, and you'll end up with a nice sheet of moss growing across the top of the media. Some people like it, some people don't. I really like it. I think it makes the orchids look more natural. And to be honest, you either get moss or you get algae slime, because especially with Bulbophyllums, you're always keeping them so moist. Some green substance is going to grow on top of your media. So it's sort of like the lesser of two evils. So this guy's pretty much done. Like that. I'm very happy with that. Just a few more bits around this side. And all I'm doing is I'm just feeling with my fingers around the plant, around the rhizome, making sure I haven't buried any of it too much. Paying very careful attention to what height that rhizome is left at, where the new growth is. I've ended up with one new growth near the edge, but that's not bad going. What I'll do is I'll pick you guys up, bring you down, we'll have a quick close look at what I've done. Right, what's sold to me is, hopefully you can see that, Bulbophyllum fascinator. It's not, well, I've been corrected. Apparently it's Bulbophyllum putidum, which kind of looks the same, but it's got fuzzy, floppy bits that wave around in the wind and are very pretty. So I've ended up with this new growth over here, quite near the edge, but that's already starting to produce a leaf. So it probably won't grow again till next year, by which point I may be thinking about repotting it again. I've been very, very careful to, you might not be able to see just by my finger, that the rhizome is at the same height as the soil. This bit here isn't really connected to the rest of the plant, but the rhizome is once again above ground. And then these two new growths which are starting to extend, if I move the tag out of the way, you might be able to see those just here. They're starting to grow. They're going to be quite close to each other, but I don't think it's going to be a major issue. If they start to distort their growth because they're pushing against each other, it's still so loose you could just pick it up and move it out of the way. So that's that guy done. I've also tried to keep a lot of the leaves facing the same way, because I try and make a habit of not actually moving my orchids out of their original alignment. They don't like it. They present their leaves in a certain way to maximize light levels, which is appropriate to their growth. So if you do move your orchids, do try and put them back in the same orientation. They will thank you for it. So that guy's done. All I've got to do is, bearing in mind where my hooks are orientated in the greenhouse, is another good thing to remember. Push these clips back on here like this. There we go. And we've got one orchid hanger / UFO ready to go. Right, on to the next one. I'm going to do all the unpotting, potting up and getting rid of the old media on the next orchid, just on my own. It's not very interesting, you've seen it lots and lots of times. But what I'm going to be doing is doing some pruning on this next one, because I really want to keep it compact in the same saucer. So what I'll do is I'll tune you guys back in when I'm at that stage. So stay tuned. Okay, so as we've touched on the subject of roots during this video, I thought I'd use this as an excellent opportunity to show you what a healthy root system should look like. Hopefully you guys can see that there. This thing's got an immense amount of roots on it. These thick black ones here actually belong to this little Drosera capensis, which is growing in here. I might be able to actually extricate him if I'm very careful. There we go, little Drosera capensis. He's been in there for ages, he just self-seeded. But you can see the enormous root system. These dark brown roots, or these dark sort of black roots, these are from that fern. They produce masses of roots, huge amounts of them. It looks like fern mounts, like Zazim, I think it's called Zaxim. So this has got an enormous root system on it, so it's going to be very easy to divide in order to get the fit back in the pot. And also I do find that when you prune an orchid like this, very often you'll find that it will bloom pretty much straight away afterwards. So that is what a nice big healthy root system should look like. So alright, what I'll do now is pick it up, get it over there, get the last of these sheaths off, and then we can start to divide it up and see if we can fit it in the pot a bit better. Okay, so bearing in mind we've got this huge mat of Bulbophyllum ambrosia, which is sort of all interconnected and trailing all over the place. We already know that it's going to be too big for the saucer in which we're going to try and plant it. And we need to bear in mind, obviously it's producing lots of new growths from various directions. This one looks like it's been accidentally snapped off by me, or actually it may have just, well, it looks a bit rotten actually. Not sure what's happened to that one there, but anyway, it's immaterial, that one's gone. So here's our saucer. We can already see that this plant isn't going to go back in here in the same way that it was growing previously. So we're going to have to make it smaller. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to move it first of all. And I'm going to place it on top of the table like this. And I'm going to lay it out almost flat. And what I'm looking for is I'm looking for areas where I can make the least number of cuts to achieve the sort of the best way of separating out by making the least number of cuts. I can already see one cut that can be made here, so I'm going to just snip that off there. And by minimizing the number of cuts, we're also minimizing the chance that we're going to get some sort of nasty infection. Now, just what we're going to do is we've got the cut end of the pruning wound I've just made. I'm just going to rub a little bit of cinnamon onto that. In fact, what I'm actually going to do is, hopefully you guys can see that if I hold it up to you like that. It's a bit dark, unfortunately. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pick you up, actually move you quickly. It's the only way you're going to be able to see what I'm doing. And you're not going to be able to see it if you're stuck up there. Right, okay. There we go. So we have the orchid directly in front of me, and you should be able to see now. So this is the big lump I've just cut a little piece off. This is the little piece that I've just cut off. You should be able to see there's a lead here, and this is where it was sort of growing down over the edge of the pot. So we've got quite a few leads coming off of this growth, and this is the resulting piece of stem I've snipped off. So what is that? What we've got is we've got the stick or the rhizome which it was connected to the larger plant. We don't want to leave that on as a large growing stick because it's just a food source for fungi. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut that off like that, and we're going to dip our finger into a bit of the cinnamon like that, so you hopefully be able to see that on the end of my finger. And then we're just going to paint that onto our pruning wound. You might not be able to see that, it's literally just here. So we put a little bit of cinnamon on there, and that's going to stop that from, hopefully help protect that piece of the orchid from catching any nasty bacterial infections. What I'm going to do is put the orchid back on the saucer like this, and just have a look at where we need to make further cuts. See, right, it's starting to unfurl nicely here. Okay, so these bits here were already overhanging the edge of the plant. That's growing that way and that way. And there's 3 little ones there, we can snip those off. So we want to basically be looking to make a minimum, keep a minimum of 3 pseudo bulbs together to give whatever it is you cut off the best chance of survival. So there's one there. And once again, I'm just going to cut the resulting piece of stem we're not using anymore down as low as possible. I just paint a little bit of cinnamon on there like that. Now we're starting to get to an orchid which is almost, I mean almost a manageable size. It's starting to look good, so I'm feeling confident now that what I've got here I'm going to be able to get back in this saucer in some sort of organised manner. So I'm going to make one more cut just here. I'm going to cut it there. That's going to allow me to divide this section here out. And that's just where the, there we go. So, just want to chase down where we made that little cut. I can't actually remember where it was. It was on here somewhere. Ah, here it is. It's on this pseudobulb here. You can see these roots of the fern. It's for such a diminutive plant. It produces huge amounts of roots. So I'm going to put a last little bit of cinnamon on there. Like that to protect. There's another nice size division just there as well. It's starting to look really good now. So yeah, what I'll do is I'll get on and pop this up, and then we'll have a look once it's all done. I really hope you've enjoyed this video. I've really enjoyed making it. It's been quite a good one, to be honest. It's nice to have a bit of a sense of purpose rather than just sort of ad-libbing as we go along. So this is the Bulbophyllum ambrosia. Most of it, not all of it, is put back in the saucer. And it's all, I've even managed to save the little tiny Drosera capensis as well. It's probably going to sulk a little bit. They don't usually like having their roots disturbed. But I managed to get most of it back in the saucer. It's much more compact. It's much more laid out how I want it to be. So I'm very happy about that. And I've also been left with some big fat divisions like this, which I'm going to go ahead and mount now, because I think it'd be nice to have one mounted as well. And I've got another one here, so I've got 2 nice big adult divisions, which not entirely sure what I'm going to do. I'm probably going to put one on eBay, I think, to be honest, because I don't need that many. So most of it's gone back in. It's had a good prune. It looks really respectable, and hopefully, I often find this, as a result of the pruning work and the divisions and the disturbance, usually stimulates them to flower pretty quickly as well. So I'm excited about that. I'm going to go and put them in the greenhouse, give them a good soaking, and fingers crossed they'll be happy as Larry. I'm sure they will be. They've got some nice fresh media that should tie them over for the next sort of well, hopefully 18 months. It's the bigger bark, so it should last a bit longer. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you found it, I hope you've certainly taken something from it. What little advice I can offer you has worked for me. And so obviously there's absolutely no reason why it shouldn't work for you as well. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.